Hello and welcome to News Central. This is a place where we have exclusive conversation, and this one is 60 Minutes with Mr. K. My name is Kayode Akintemi. This is the space where rhetoric is stripped away, where political theater gives way to hard truth, and where we confront the questions that shape the very soul of Africa. Here we shine a light on the challenges of leadership, interrogate the failures of governance, and explore the opportunities that could define Africa's place in a rapidly changing world. On this program, the conversations are unfiltered, the questions are uncompromised, and the stakes could not be much higher than this. Because at the heart of every discussion lies one central concern: the future of Africa and her people. Today, we continue in that tradition as we engage a voice that has become one of the continent's fiercest advocate for justice, good governance, and Pan-African unity. We're joined by a man whose voice has become synonymous with uncompromising truth and fiery advocacy for Africa's rebirth, Professor PLO Lumumba, and I hope I got that right.
In fact, you got the pronunciation quite
Right. Admit, I'm glad I did. He is a professor, distinguished lawyer, professor of public law, former director of the Kenyan Anti-Corruption Commission, former director of Kenya School of Law as well. Beyond his academic and professional accomplishments, he has become one of Africa's most outspoken voices on governance, corruption, leadership, and the urgent need for a united and self-reliant continent. Today, he joins me for what promises to be a compelling conversation on the future of Africa. Prof, truly a joy to have you here and having a conversation with you. I've been looking forward to this.
So thank you very much. I believe what you are doing is important for the continent of Africa to give the oxygen of publicity to voices that mean well for the continent.
Yes. Okay, so let's start with what has happened recently. Recently, we have noticed that there is conversation amongst some of the African leaders looking, seemingly aspiring to unite Africa in a way that makes it possible for it to speak with one voice. Let me lay the foundation for the conversation. If you want to go from Nigeria, fly to Niger. Sometimes you have to go all the way to Paris before you come back. You want to go to Libya, you struggle to find a direct flight. But there's a direct flight to London that is 6 hours, direct flight to US that is almost 12 hours. But places within Africa, you struggle to find flight. And that means comma, struggle. Education, a big problem. We have xenophobia and a number of other things. So let's start from the state of the idea or concept or feeling of Pan-Africanism. How do you assess that as of today?
There is a sense in which Pan-Africanism is articulated from what I call a very romantic standpoint, the feel-good Pan-Africanism. But I believe that the pioneers of Pan-Africanism meant a Pan-Africanism that would change the quality of people's lives, improve our economies, improve our agriculture to support the economy, improve our technology, improve everything that would improve the quality of the African man and woman in the villages wherever they are. The tragedy as I see it, and I think it is Kwame Nkrumah who put it so very well, when he said neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism and the most dangerous. The neocolonial project is alive and well through the politicians in Africa, many of them. But we cannot, from my standpoint, continue to blame neocolonialism. We were not the only peoples who are colonized. So what do I see in Africa today? I see in Africa a continent that has the appetite to change, a continent that makes many declarations, from the 1973 Addis Ababa Declaration on Internal Trade, from the Lagos Plan of Action of 1980, in the area of aviation that you've talked about, the Yamoussoukro Declaration on freeing the airspace. And we have a forest of declarations. Our problem is implementation. The day we begin to implement some of the things that we have declared, that is the day we begin to earn the dividends. Look at, for example, Africa Agenda 2063, which is a rehash of what was said in 1963 by Nkrumah, what was said in Lagos in 1980. What are we doing to give practical meaning? And let us, if you permit me, go step by step. Look at the free movement of people. We still have visa regime, which make it difficult for Africans to travel from one country to another. We still have border controls rather than border management. We still have situations where we pay tariffs which are necessary at the airports. You go to the Democratic Republic of Congo, you've got to pay a fee in order to get out. Tanzania is reintroducing or introducing the same thing. So what we must do is to begin to do what was intended. If you look at the regions, ECOWAS has beautiful pronouncements. East African Community has beautiful pronouncement. SADC, beautiful pronouncement. Central Africa, beautiful pronouncement. Maghreb, beautiful pronouncement. But do we implement? The answer is no. Africa Continental Free Trade Area, headquartered now in Accra, Ghana since the year 2018. But we are importing completely knocked down kits from China, so we are effectively exporting the jobs. So our Pan-Africanism, in a nutshell, must be a Pan-Africanism that is felt in the hearts and minds and in the lives of people. So that if I'm in Nigeria and I'm in Kaduna or I'm in Bayelsa, I can associate with Pan-Africanism. Otherwise, it becomes hollow, it becomes a slogan.
What makes it so difficult? Because I love the analysis you just given now. What makes it so difficult for African leaders, or some people like to call them so-called African leaders? What makes it so difficult for them to activate what seems so simple? Because activation is the key here. If you have a principle that says free flight, free airspace for everybody that wants to fly across the African continent, if you're African and you're able to move from one to the other, border management instead of patrol and control, like you said, what makes it so difficult to activate this?
My views may be subject to debate, but I think that our problem, particularly the political class in Africa, are so obsessed with occupation of office for its own sake, so that your typical African politician is interested in the next elections, longevity in office, the perks that go with that office. And Chinua Achebe captured it very well when he wrote his book, A Man of the People, and he speaks a lot more boldly in The Trouble with Nigeria in 1983, and also talks about it in Anthills of the Savannah. So that there is a sense in which we don't think beyond now. The net effect is that this nationality, this sovereignty, we are Kenyans, we are Nigerians, we are Ghanaians, we are Tunisians, we are Beninois, stops us from thinking big. As a friend of mine says, we prefer to own 100% of a rabbit rather than 5% of an elephant. If only we could think differently, we would discover that intra-African trade would easily make Nigeria our 2 trillion economy. And the impact of that would be evident in every household. Our young men and women who want to go to Europe and America would not want to go to Europe and America. The Nigerian professionals, the Ghanaian professionals The Zambian professionals who are now being humiliated in the United States and other places would come back to the continent. Easier said than done. And what is now afflicting Africa is that in the political arena, one does not see politicians that are champions for Pan-Africanism. In the early days, and this was amazing, in the early days, here in Nigeria, we called Nnamdi Azikiwe the Zik of Africa. We had Kwame Nkrumah, we had Nyerere, we had Machel, we had Abib Bourguiba, we had Gamal Abdel Nasser, we had Kaunda, and they did not have the advantage of the internet. Traveling was difficult, communication was difficult, but their conviction was different. I think that is what we've got to revive. We've got to revive that by energizing ourselves and reminding ourselves that the future and safety of the continent not only requires but demands that we do that. Because, my brother, what I see and what makes me fear is the new scramble for the continent of Africa. You see everybody looking to Africa. Not so long ago, we saw African leaders, almost 40 of them, in Yokohama, in Japan. One would ask, why would 40 African leaders fly in private jets to go to Yokohama? Then they'll possibly be told, we have given you $20 billion. There are Africans I know who can give $20 billion in this continent. So what we must do, and I've said this before, that Africa needs only one mega meeting in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, with 3 agenda points. What are we doing wrong? After we have asked that question, what can we do to make it right? And the third agenda, within what period? So that 2063 is not the date to which we walk gingerly. It is a date which will be the date of announcement of the splendid things that we will have done for our people. If we did that, then Africa would be in a space where it will be respected. The beauty is Africa is turning, but is like the Titanic. When it turns, you don't quite see it, but it's turning.
Okay, that is fantastic analogy again and again. You've hit the nail on the head, but let's unbundle it very carefully. The choice word is, you said there has to be a revival of the soul for us to have a Pan-Africanism that makes sense and touches lives and change things. Where do we start this revival or revolution from? Is it our young people, or is it the changing of the minds of the leaders that we have, that we question their integrity and their capacity to drive any positive agenda for the continent?
In my view, it is a combination of all those things. It is easier when the leaders change their mind because they have the instruments of power and the instruments of state. That is the shortcut to the change that we desire. So that in the West African region, for example, if we had a crop of leaders who are interested in changing and who take their positions of leadership seriously, Nigeria could be the anchor country. With over 250 million people, with professionals in every direction, what is the missing ingredient? Is political will and sustained political will. And Nigeria has shown it before. When there was the crisis in Liberia and Sierra Leone, and jointly with Ghana, they put together what was called ECOMOG. That was leadership. When there was a crisis in the Gambia and they showed their teeth, there was stabilization in the Gambia. The problem was sustainability. How do we sustain that without it being a flash in the pan, so that it encompasses every other area? It encompasses trade, it encompasses education, it encompasses technological transfer. If that were to be done, Nigeria would be the anchor on the western part of the continent. South Africa must liberate herself from xenophobia. It is the big economy in that region. And it is therefore, if you permit me, the economic mecca for the countries in that region. And if it were to take leadership, and the tragedy is that I don't see South African political leadership coming out firmly when there is xenophobic behavior on the part of a few of our citizens. It would be the anchor in that region. In the eastern region, there is a competition now. Ethiopia is a big economy with nearly 120 million people, is beginning to emerge in the Horn. It would be another anchor. Kenya has always had historical advantages as the third most important headquarters of the UN. Kenya could be an anchor, and of course, Tanzania is also emerging in that regard. In the middle, we've got to stabilize the Democratic Republic of Congo. Neither than Western Europe combined, we've got to sanitize the politics of that place and ensure that it plays a positive role. Up in the north, Egypt and Morocco and Algeria will have to determine who creates the leverage that is necessary. And that is at the political level. At the lower level, perhaps not lower level, at another level, where are our academics? The silence of the academics is deafening. In the 60s, we had Makerere in Uganda. The academics were speaking at the University of Ibadan. The academics were speaking. The writers were writing. Wole Soyinka, if it was not Wole Soyinka, it was Chinua Achebe, it was Taban Loliong. It was the writers were writing. The universities were alive and well. Young voices were being heard. Where are the young voices? Where are the musicians? Femi Anikula Pokute, Miriam Makeba, Manu Dibango, Mbaraka Munshe Maruka. All these things must, in the nature of things, come together in order to send an unequivocal message, particularly to the political class, that the time is now for you to wake up. And if they don't wake up, my brother, a revolution is in the offing. And it has happened. We saw it in Tiananmen Square in China, and China has never been the same again. We saw it in Korea in the 1980s. We saw it in France in 1968. A little earlier, we saw it in Turkey in 1908. That revolution can be managed so that it's a responsible resolution that catapults the continent in the right direction. But we must tear down the borders so that the borders which are in our mind, this thing that I am Nigerian, I'm Kenyan, I'm Ghanaian, when we go out there, as Nyerere once said, nobody cares whether you are from Nigeria or from Kenya. They only care that you are an African.
Yep.
And that is what we must address. And if we do that, let me tell you, it will not take 5 years before our economies begin to change. Intra-African trade at the very best is 20%. Intra-African trade. Suppose in the next 5 years we were to improve it to 50%. The impact of it, the importation of things that is now happening, including very basic things like rice and fish and poultry and meat, we could do that within the continent of Africa. So all those factors must, in the nature of things, align. And once they do align, there is no shortage of resolution that we have already made, which upon implementation would make our continent be seen differently.
So I'm tempted to put two questions together, but I would take one first. And that first one is, you have been in Nigeria many more times in the recent years than we've ever seen you here. And more we see a situation where almost every organization that has a major event says, go and get Professor Lumumba. He speaks so well about Africa and Nigeria and things like that. He motivates us. Do you see any government, any leader in Africa today that you can point to that everybody can pivot around and say, this is the one that can help to drive the Pan-African agenda or drive the agenda for Africa to begin to do well? Can you name one or two or three?
Of the serving leaders, there are people that I've had conversations with, but I believe, unfortunately, that they are overstaying their welcome. But I still think they have a role to play. I hold the view that if President Museveni of Uganda were to choose to leave office and to focus on Africa, he has the passion and the idea of leading this particular quest. But he still is burdened with office. And that burden does not allow him to see and to implement the things that he ought to implement. And I've had a conversation with him several years
But
ago.
how do you do that outside of office?
At that time, I took the view that he could leave the presidency of Uganda and become the president of East African Community, which would be largely ceremonial, so that he's still in the space of power. I still would encourage him to do that. And indeed, what happened at that time, that there was a process of fast tracking of East African Political Federation. The president ought to have been sworn in January 2010. Had it happened at that time, President Museveni has the passion and in my view, the vision of being that leader. Having been in power for quite some time, I think that he has that ability. But unfortunately, he continues to remain in office and therefore confined to Uganda. That, unfortunately, is the leader that comes to mind. I had a conversation and even took a delegation to President Chakwera of Malawi. He started so very well, but Malawi, because of COVID and other things, has been embroiled in economic difficulties, and therefore he has remained the president of Malawi too much. President Paul Kagame, people judge him rather harshly, but President Paul Kagame is yet another leader who, if he were not encumbered with the many things that he is in the region, has that particular vision. So those are the individuals that come to mind, because I've had conversations.
Africa, these are the top three people.
These are the top three that I've had conversations with. And if you look at the manner in which they have conducted their affairs, you can see that Africa is in their mind. Why do I say Kagame? Kagame's role was even recognized by the African Union. And when we wanted to reform the African Union, it is he who was appointed to lead the change process. And we have something in the African Union called the Kagame reforms. So I hold the view that these individuals in the recent past have demonstrated an appetite for something that is bigger than their little countries. The others have not had the advantage of having very intimate conversations with them. And what I see does not inspire me that they are looking at things from a Pan-African perspective. Cyril Ramaphosa, in the early days, I thought with his trade unionism, taking from the fact that Africa had helped South Africa to defeat the apartheid regime, would have been in the forefront. But what I see now is happening in South Africa, and his deafening silence on these issues tells me that he is not my man. He is not my man. Not my man is the African.
The level of xenophobia.
The level of xenophobia is appalling. When people go to hospitals and flash out fellow Africans in the name of preserving their things for themselves, what then is Ubuntu? What then is Ubuntu? And South Africa has given Africa the word Ubuntu, I am because you are. And it's their Desmond Tutu who spoke about it. So that is how I see it. I believe that others would have other leaders who in their mind would do that. I've found something for Nigeria. And whenever I come to Nigeria, I see the appetite. I see the appetite for great things to happen. But those things are not happening. And I must say that it is the political class that must re-examine themselves.
Okay.
We must indict them. They could do better.
We will surely talk about indictment, but we'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about Nigeria a bit more explicitly, starting from this issue of indictment of Nigerian leaders and also looking at still Pan-Africanism from the perspective of what the Chief of Defense Staff is doing in Nigeria, bringing together all of the CDS across the African continent. So we'll take a short break. We still have Professor Lumumba with us. Please stay with us.
Africa is rising. Again, we hear our sounds echo on the other side. Afrobeat and Afropop reinvented, hip life brought back to life, new energy infused into Kwaito and Kwela. Africa is balling. Every stroke, every shot, every raise, we find our place at the top. Taking the helm of real power, new hopes for democracies. A breed of entrepreneurial tigers, audacious storytellers, and a promising generation raring to go. Truly, Africa is rising. And this is where the stories that define our continent live.
Welcome back to this program where we have conversation about the African continent, about Nigeria, and everything to do with all of us. This is 60 Minutes with Mr. K here on News Central. I have with me still here Professor PLO Lumumba. Prof, thank you for staying and being here today. Just recently, the Chief of Defense Staff, General Christopher Gwaben Musa, decided to convene a summit, the first ever of its type, bringing together all of the Chief of Defense Staff across the continent. I was at that event. On the first day, I noticed that there were not that many CDS across the continent coming together. That gave me some concern that even amongst the armed forces around the continent, there isn't that amount of collaboration and communal belief in doing great things for the continent, despite the level of insecurity across the continent. What do you think we need to begin to do to be able to galvanize these individuals, even in a professional organization like the armed forces, to come together and know that they cannot individually solve the problem of insecurity in their country? Because when there is a problem anywhere on the west coast of Africa, it runs across the rest of it. What do you need to do?
I was present at that meeting, and when I was invited to attend, I was excited. And the CGS General Musa must be congratulated, and the Nigerian Armed Forces must be congratulated, because this is the beginning. Although we may not have had the CGSs from the countries, representation was quite impressive. When you are talking about 54 recognized countries and you have representation slightly above 40, that is good. And it is a beginning. And I think what happens in initiatives such as this is also informed by suspicion. And one may even say jealousy. Why is it Nigeria that is doing it? Why did we not think of it before Nigeria? I think those things sometimes do happen. But Nigeria is logical. Nigeria is Africa's most populous nation. Nigeria is logical because Nigeria, in real terms, ought to be the biggest economy in Africa. Nigeria is logical because of the quality of human resource that it has, completely unrivaled in the continent of Africa. Nigeria is logical because Nigeria is the country that can actually be the anchor of African revival. So I would myself say that that is a good beginning. And Vice President Shetima was clear in the message that he read on behalf of President Bola Tinubu that he hopes, and I hope that this will be one of the recommendations, that this becomes a permanent thing where heads of our military formations meet and discuss security issues. It came to light that through research, there are over 1,000 non-state actors in Africa involved in insurgency of one kind or another. So it tells you that we ought to collaborate. And when we collaborate, then we'll discover that the security problem that we have in the continent of Africa will be reduced dramatically. And perhaps it starts modestly. And what we ought to do is then to build on it. Once our men and women in uniform realize the significance of working together, all these things about border management, all these things about insecurity will not see us rely on the United States of America or Europe or even Russia or China, but we will be doing things ourselves. And I think that we are on the right trajectory. The most important thing is not how you start, but how you finish. Our problem in Africa, we are good at starting initiatives. And once we start them, then we stop, then we start again. I hope that it will be written 100 years from today that a good thing started in Nigeria, in Abuja. It was heads of the armed forces coming together, and Africa is peaceful because initiatives and intelligence was shared from that day on.
Okay, so let's talk about a broader perspective of leadership now. You look at a country like Nigeria and you're wondering, how did this nation get it so wrong to the point where a massive number of Nigerians are crying out on a daily basis? We are hungry, we're starving, with arable land all over the country, with possibility and potential to feed the continent and be the food basket. How did Nigeria get it so wrong? And what kind of leaders do you think will make it such that Nigeria can begin to walk the straight and narrow path that leads to prosperity?
You know, brother, frustrated and answering your question, in 1983, Chinua Achebe wrote a very small book, The Trouble with Nigeria. And in that book, he says that the trouble with Nigeria, and one can dare say with Africa, is simply and squarely a problem of leadership. What does Chinua then say about leadership? The majority of individuals who take positions of leadership in Nigeria are individuals who want to be in office because of the perks that the officers promise. The long motorcades, the sirens, the clearing of the roads when you are arriving, the regal nature in which we are treated at airports, the business opportunities that are open to you when you get into political office. But leadership ought to be sacrificial. It is Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe of South Africa who said in 1960 that a leader is he or she who knows that it is a burden, it is sacrificial, it enjoins you to ensure that you are a midwife whose only duty is to guarantee people that the quality of their lives will be improved by using their taxes for their benefit. And that is the kind of leadership that Nigeria, and I dare say most of Africa, needs. Until that day when leaders or those in position of leadership recognize that I'm here not to earn a salary, I'm here not to get an oil block, I'm here to utilize the resources of the nation to improve the quality of their life. If we have oil as a resource, it should improve the quality of the people of Nigeria. If we have agriculture and we love rice, We are not importing rice, we are improving agriculture. If we have opportunities for tourism, we are creating an environment where tourism can happen. If we have mines, we are mining for the benefit of the people. If we have education, the education is for the benefit of the people. And if you have such leaders, number one, they'll not appeal to people's religious affiliation. They'll not appeal to people's ethnicity. They will have what, for want of a better term, I call the ideology of development. And Nyerere put it so very well. Development is not first about things. It is first about people. And once you develop the people, they'll then create things that improve the quality of their lives.
Yeah. So when you look at Nigeria today, do you have any hope that things will get better? You're looking at it, those of us on the inside, we see and we know what we think and what we feel and what we experience on a daily basis. But somebody looking at it from the outside into the inside, what's your perspective? What's your thought? Do you see a lot of hope?
Hope must never die. And things are happening that I think can change. 2 years ago, I was in Akwa Ibom in Uyo, and I saw the quality of the roads. And I went back home and I was talking to parliamentarians and I told them, don't go to China to look for quality of road. Go to Uyo in Akwa Ibom. Go to Abuja. I went to Nasarawa and I was talking to the governor, one Mr. Sule, about the rice. And I said, if you can do this with your rice, you are not going to import rice if we continue on this trajectory. I went to visit President Olusegun Obasanjo 3 years ago in Abeokuta, and I saw what is happening in that space. I went to Katsina to visit Governor Rada 1 year ago, and we had a discussion. There are things that can and should happen. That is in agriculture. And when I see what Aliko Dangote is doing with his refinery now, so that in the next few years, Nigeria is not going to export crude and import refined, so that we'll have fertilizer produced here, I believe that things are happening. So that in as much as we ought to judge ourselves, we ought not to be too harsh. And sometimes, and I know this, it is in the nature of human beings, we want instant coffee, microwave solutions. It is not going to be like that. But the pressure must be kept. And this is where I'm calling on young Nigerians. Keep up the pressure. Keep up pointing with the firmness that will open the eyes of the leaders, but not with the recklessness that will stir their anger. If you do this consistently, then they'll begin to think differently. Let us reason together. And I believe that it can be done, and it must be done. So I'm not one who is a doomsday sayer. I believe, and in Greek mythology, they say that when they opened the Pandora's box, everything else escaped except hope. So we must keep hope alive.
So what do you say to the young Nigerians who you can look at and say that there is hope and there is number in terms of if you look at the number of young Nigerians today, because 60 to 70% of Nigeria are said to be young people, median age being between 19 and 21. What do you say to them when they seem to be losing hope about the fact that their future is not secure? Elections are unreliable. The results are sometimes considered as absolutely fraudulent, not fair, not free in some places. And there are serious concerns even about 2027. So, how do you think they go from here?
Brother, this is not time to lose hope. This is not time to resign. This is not time to agonize. This is time to organize. And what I would urge young Nigerians is to organize across tribe, organize across a religion, think as Nigerians, and be present. As the Kiswahili saying goes, you cannot be shaved in your absence. You must buy the lottery ticket in order to win. You've got to be there. Identify few from your number. Join political formations. Present yourselves. I know sometimes the vote is manipulated. Guard your votes. Require of the political administration that is not those who count the vote that matters, but those who vote. Once you do that, history has been consistent in demonstrating that it can be difficult but not impossible. And if you look at the history of other countries, and we have seen the history of countries in the recent past, whether it was the Arab Spring, whether it was in Sri Lanka or in Bangladesh or in China or in Korea, it is young people who cause changes, because it is young people holding all factors constant who have a longer time to live in this country. So rise up. Stop agonizing. Stop lamenting. The last time I read it was lamentation in the Christian Bible. Stop lamenting. And once you do that, believe me, the politicians are also very chameleonic. When they recognize that they have been found out, they'll begin to do the right thing.
Okay, so let's talk now about the security of the continent and its future. There are a lot of concerns about the level of insecurity on the continent. And I guess that's why the CDS summit seems to be one that has been welcomed by a lot of Nigerians and even non-Nigerians, including yourself from what you said. What do we begin to do to secure the continent?
You know, brother, if you permit me, just look at the continent. In the Horn of Africa, an ease. In Sudan, total breakdown. In Central African Republic, the same. In Eastern Congo, the same. In Libya, the same. In Southern Cameroon, the same. In Northern Mozambique, the same. So there is such great insecurity in the continent of Africa that the only way to deal with it is continentally, using the regional economic formations as the anchor. You'll remember in the year 2020, the African Union made a pronouncement of what they call the silencing of the guns. As if to mock African Union, the guns have become even louder. And it must be remembered that the conflicts in Africa are multifaceted and hydra-headed. Some of them are resource-based. People now talk much about climate change as the source. And there are also some which are manufactured from outside. We know, for example, in the Sahel, part of it is manufactured from outside. In the Chad Basin, part of it can be said to be resource-based. And of course, religious fundamentalism is also another factor. But how do we deal with it? I think there are others better than you and I who have wrapped their minds around these issues. And they say the only way is to share intelligence. The only way is to recognize legitimate grievances, because there are also internal legitimate grievances which, if not addressed, will continue to lead to the exacerbation of these conflicts. So each conflict must be isolated and understood in its context and approached from that perspective. Yesterday, I mentioned something that I referred to as internal self-determination. Internal self-determination does not mean cessation. It simply means that when people within a country are raising certain grievances of exclusion, you devise governance systems that make them feel included. And that can happen and has happened in different countries. That is how Switzerland was created, through a confederation. That is how the Basque problem was resolved in Spain. So there are different methods of dealing with these issues. And I think that the time is now for African countries to collaborate. From a practical standpoint, how do I look at it? In the region, we must have ECOWAS playing a greater, more prominent role in mediating some of the conflicts, including engaging with the alliance of Sahelian states, which left the ECOWAS in January of this year. You should not ostracize them. Ask them, what is the problem? Come back to the fold. In East Africa, I know there have been attempts to resolve the Congo problem, the Democratic Republic of Congo problem. There is a sense in which a lot more ought to be done. In South Sudan, there is a conflict which ought to be mediated as in Sudan. Because if we don't, and we are seeing this in Central African Republic, where the Russians are much more present rather than the Africans, if we leave this vacuum, then we are telling outsiders that you can come in and resolve our problems. So when we talk about African solutions for African problems, it can be done. I know that there is an initiative that is led by former heads of state like President Olusegun Obasanjo, Thabo Mbeki, Johnson Sirleaf, and Ian Khama and others. Those can be used to good effect to do what I call shuttle diplomacy, to engage both the non-state actors and the states. This idea that if you have a conflict, you say you are not going to talk to your enemy is completely misguided. You've got to talk to people that you don't like for purposes of achieving a greater good. And this is urgent business.
Okay, so let me, because we have to begin to wrap up now. So in recent years, we've seen a wave of military takeover. Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Niger, and there are others that are concerned that it might happen in other parts of the continent. Now, some citizens were happy and they carried placards and celebrated the fact that the military is taking over in their country. And there are examples of the likes of Traore that, yeah, military might be a better option. But what's your thoughts? How do you think they're faring under military? And I know what Nigeria experienced under military, and a lot of people said, never again. But is this an option for Africa?
What is happening? My good friend Chidi Odinkalu has written a book called The Selectorate, which deals with the last Nigerian election. And what is happening in most African countries is that people are losing faith in the electoral processes. They are beginning to hold the view that their votes don't count. That is, those who count the votes that matter most. And that politicians, particularly those who are the incumbent, have mastered the art of ensuring that they secure the results that they desire. For that reason,
The language they use now is that they write the results that they want. Absolute. And they tell you go to Paul. They tell you go.
and that I think has made the people to be disillusioned. If they did what they did and the people's lives were improving, they were able to pay school fees, able to take care of their medical bills, able to secure jobs for younger people, perhaps they would not mind. But elections in many cases are manipulated and the quality of the people's lives do not improve and the politicians become richer and richer. So because people are helpless, military coups in their mind appear like the solution. But as to whether the military solution are successful, the jury is still out. When you are talking about a nation, the pronouncements of military leaders in year 1 and 2 and 3 and even 5 may appear very rosy. But we may begin to see where men in uniform now abandon their uniform and wear suits and then come to the ballot. What does it tell us? That Africa is in a governance crisis, and that therefore we ought to very actively debate what kind of governance we need in order to ensure that the people's lives are protected and improved. I've said, and I'm repeating it again, we must now begin to ask ourselves, are there elements within our otherwise very feudal traditional systems which can be borrowed and be customized in the 21st century, so that within one country you have different governance systems and a coordinating authority? Is this a possibility? So that we have a measure of what the Chinese say, democracy with a Chinese character, so that we talk about democracy with a Nigerian character, dealing with the specificities of Nigeria, democracy with a Ghanaian character, with a Kenyan character, dealing with the specificities and peculiarities as a way of immunizing ourselves from military takeovers. This, to me, is a conversation that we are afraid to hold, but we must hold it sooner rather than later. Otherwise, the men in uniform will emerge as Moseses, latter-day Moseses, with rod and staff, but this time with Kalashnikovs in their hands and shooting their way to power and telling us that they are our saviors and we will accept them, unfortunately.
So that takes me to the question of, is dictatorship an option for Africa? Because some people relate this to, we're used to kings and emperors and the kind of leaders that when they speak, we stand in awe or we bow in awe and say, Your Highness, the king, and all that. And that seemed to be the culture. Will dictatorship, whether directly or indirectly, or whether benevolent or not, will that change anything on the continent?
I don't accept dictatorship because I want to think, I want to participate in my governance, but I accept discipline. There must be order. Things must be done in an orderly manner. And I think this is the nature of all societies, that there must be an authority or people who are in positions of authorities who tell us on the basis of the laws that we have enacted that things must be done in this way. It may be inconvenient, but we look at the greater good. So I do not want to use the word dictatorship. We'd rather use the word disciplined governance is critical for Africa to go forward. In other words, if we are not disciplined, then we can achieve very little. Even in our little household, there must be order. We must know there is time when people eat, there is time when people pray if they are prayerful, there is time when things are locked, there is time when chicken come home to roost, there is time when the cows go out to graze, there is time when they come in. That is how we must order our societies. And even when we talk about discipline, it will differ from society to society. But the end result is that we want the quality of people's lives and an environment where we can have a conversation such as this, where even if we disagree in an agreeable manner. That is the environment in which I want to live and operate.
So I will be asking then, if Africans fail to confront the cycle of strongmen, whether they are in uniform or they are in suits, if Africa fails to confront them, what do you think will happen to the future of the continent?
If we don't build institutions, I'm an institutions person, so that even those men and women that we call strong, they act within an institution, so that if they misbehave, the institution will call them to order. If we don't do that, then it may be worse before it becomes better. So we have a choice to choose the path of doing the right thing for the greater good, or to hide our heads in the sand like the ostrich before us and keep on praying and fasting in the hope that divinity will come and intervene on our behalf, and it will not happen. So what is the wisdom of the occasion? Let us act and let us be the makers of our future. The future is made today, and it is us to be the architects of that future.
Okay, so finally, across the continent, we've seen leaders amend constitutions. We have Paul Biya in Cameroon, a very old man who is struggling to even stay alive and stay awake, but yet want to continue to be the president. Yoweri Museveni, who you seem to have a lot of respect for because of his antecedent from way back. Alassane Ouattara in Cote d'Ivoire. Why does Africa continue to tolerate this speed?
One of the problems of Africans, and perhaps it is because of our ethnic diversity, the politicians know how to manipulate us. And I've heard talks being said of leaders, he is a thief, but he is our thief. He is a dictator, but he is our dictator. until the day we liberate ourselves from such primordial thoughts, the myopic, the selfish, and ambitious politician will always manipulate those weaknesses for their benefit. And that is why, therefore, they become prisoners of their ambition and they don't want to leave. I said it at one time when President Robert Gabriel Mugabe was still alive, and I said it rather recklessly with the help of hindsight in his very presence, that a good dancer must know when to leave the stage. These individuals, what they do is to destroy their countries. And I said on that occasion that he or she who is in position of leadership cannot be judged to be successful until his successor succeeds. You have a duty is like a relay race. A relay race makes sense when the first person who starts hands over the baton, and then they finish as a team. I wish these individuals could see it. Unfortunately, because we are weak and we only grumble for one day, the bears of this world can amend the constitution. The Ngwemas of this world can amend the constitution. The Wataras of this world can amend the constitution. My friend Yoweri Kaguta Museveni can amend the constitution and remove age limit and remove term limit. And they know that our attention span is so short that after grumbling for 1 week, we go back to our daily business and they go back to doing what they do best, to remain in power.
Professor Patrice Lumumba, we've got to go because time is up, but I can't let you go without asking you. The current trend around the world is the man called Donald Trump, trending every day. And this is a phenomenon that has happened to America. But it becomes embarrassing when African leaders go around the table and they're standing behind him like he's the emperor of the world. And you begin to wonder, how worried should Africans be? Because the likes of, what's his name now, Muammar Gaddafi, would probably be one to stand up against someone like Donald Trump and say, you don't rule Libya, you don't rule me. What do we need to do to get leaders that can stand up to any leader in the world?
Confidence. When you have low self-esteem, then you are impressed with very base things. You are impressed by sitting on the president's chair at the Oval Office and you feel nice for 2 seconds. And Trump has mastered the art of humiliating leaders who are weak. That is why he calls them, summons them literally to the Oval Office and treats them like high school students before a high school principal. And unfortunately, until the day that we are strong, and John Henry Clark, an American Pan-Africanist, once said that whenever we talk about Black beautiful, we must always remind ourselves that beauty without power means nothing. So when we become powerful, and power means that we are working in unity and we are speaking with one voice, we'll continue to be humiliated because we'll be isolated. 4 of us are called to the Oval Office, another 4, another 5. We are humiliated, we feel nice, we receive red carpet treatment, and we are happy that we are in the United States of America. It's like a child who has gone to the Disney park, and then we come back home with nothing in our hands except that we were told we speak good English.
Thank you so much, Professor PLO Lumumba. Thank you for your passion, your voice, and for sharing your thoughts with us in 60 Minutes with Mr. K. And to our viewers, thank you for staying with us through this powerful conversation with Professor Lumumba. Remember, the future of Africa is not written in stone. It depends on the action that we take today. Prof, such a joy later to have. On that note, my name is Kayode Akintemi, and this is 60 Minutes with Mr. K and on Moose Central TV. And thank you very much.